What I would like to do is just start with a slide I mention very often that discusses why is it we have to talk about financial literacy. And we have to talk about financial literacy now with respect to 20 years ago because the world has changed in many ways that make financial literacy become really important to be able to do the things that most of us do normally. These changes are related to changes in pensions, are related to changes in the labor market, and are related to changes in the financial markets. So it's not just one, and in my view, they are here to stay. So it's really important that we get equipped to deal with this very new economic environment. In most countries, because of the aging of the population, we move to a system, or we have system in place which require more decision from individual. So the system which are more defined contributions. The labor market has become such that there is a lot more mobility, so pensions have to be portable, but also investment in educations become incredibly important. And finally, I think everywhere and in every country, we see a lot of changes in the financial markets, not just more complex financial instrument, but I think one of the features, and in fact, in my view, one of the reasons why we have to be really concerned about financial literacy is that we have made opportunities or capacity to borrow available to everybody. But as a result, people have an opportunity now to go heavily in debt, which is not what was possible before, and this can have important consequences. We have seen some of the consequences very clearly in the US, where I live. So opening up opportunity, giving people financial assets they do not understand, not always have positive effects. So I always say that we are going to a system that shifts the risk from the government and the employer onto individuals. It's very much up to individuals to make decisions which have implication for themselves and for society. Given that, one of the questions we can ask and that we have tried to ask in some of our work is, how equipped are people to live in this new economic environment, which is happening, these changes are happening at different degrees across countries. And this is really one of the questions that we have tried to ask. I have to say, it took a long time actually to ask this very simple question. The second question is, are there vulnerable groups? And in particular, who are the people, in a sense, who know the least? And this we are already trying to link, in a sense, to inequality. And the third question is actually very hard. And this is something that, in a sense, we probably haven't completely answered yet. And I'm trying to provide some of the preliminary work today, talking about in which way financial literacy is linked to behavior. Does it really matter whether we know or not? Can we just hire financial advisors so we don't have to bother about knowing some of the concepts that are important to make financial decisions? And today I'm going to speak about, of course, wealth inequality, given the topic of the seminar. We have actually written several papers. And as you know, when you invite an academic, he's going to come and bring you 3 books. So I had the books ready to bring here, and my staff always tell me, don't bring any book. They don't want to read the books. So I didn't bring the books, but they are all posted on our website, and also the papers. We have finished writing the papers on financial knowledge and wealth inequality, which I was ready to bring here, but they are also posted on our website, so you can download it from there. So let me actually start really going through these questions. I'm going to give you a snapshot of some of the work we have done, and I'm going to try to be as brief and as synthetic as possible, and as give you kind of the intuition in some of the things that we have been doing, and hopefully we'll have a lot of discussion at the end about these questions. I feel I work in a very nice area because I feel that some of the questions that I've tried to address are very basic questions, and that's actually what makes, in my view, some of this work really interesting. Let me start by saying that some of these questions were made possible by this grant we got at the European Investment Bank Institute. We had brought together a team of 9 countries, and so we have learned a lot by doing international comparisons. In fact, 2 of the topics I'm going to discuss today are really, in a sense, came to life because of the comparison across countries. And these are actually some of our research teams. And I just want to turn to tell you, how equipped are people to live in a world where they have to make decisions about their pensions, where they deal with complex instruments like subprime mortgages or convertible bonds. How much do we know? How much are we, in a sense, knowledgeable about this concept that are at the basis of financial decision making? We moved to a world where there was a CFO, a chief financial officer, normally with an MBA in finance, which was making decisions about pension. And now this responsibility is ours, but nobody seems to have asked us how much we know about pension, or we know about this simple concept. So, CFO take courses in corporate finance, but people don't take any course, for example, in personal finance. And I think actually we should start adding courses in personal finance at the university. We certainly have one now at GW. What do you ask if you want to test whether people are financially literate? Do you ask if they know the Black-Scholes formula for pricing options so that they can price convertible bonds? Or what is it that they ask? In our case, we have started with the most basic concept. If you look at simple decisions like saving or portfolio, people have to know at least the basics. They certainly have to be able to do calculation. They certainly have to understand inflation, given that almost all financial decisions have to do with time and transfer of resources over time. And of course, they have to know about risk, because risk is at the essence of financial markets. So I want to actually describe the question we ask just to measure financial knowledge. And there are 2 things I want you to notice. First, how simple are the questions we have asked? In this first case, we basically wanted to assess basic numeracy. It's as basic as asking a question. Suppose you have $100 in a saving account, the interest rate is 2%. After 5 years, how much do you think you have in the account if you left the money to grow? Note, we don't say, is it more than 110? We don't even ask them to do like an interest compounding. So we want them to have an intuition. We don't want them to do a calculation in your hand. They have to pick an answer. And we give an opportunity to say, I do not know, or refuse to answer, because we don't want people to actually pick at random. And at the same time, we want to know the people who think they do not know. The second question we ask, and I'm actually going to show you that you only need 3 questions actually to measure financial knowledge in a way that is able to proxy, at least for basic literacy. This has to do about inflation, and the question was phrased as, imagine the interest rate on your saving account is 1 and inflation was 2. After a year, how much would you be able to buy in the account? More than today, exactly the same, and less than today. This looks very simple. In fact, actually, we spend a lot of time designing these questions, because if you notice here, we want to ask a question which is the way in which you read in the newspaper, right? In the way in which the financial industry talk to individuals. We don't explain what inflation is. We use the word inflation, right? So this is kind of a joint test of knowledge plus knowledge of what inflation does in an everyday setting. The third question has to do about risk, understanding of risk diversification, and is more complex, also because we need a complex answer to be able, complex question to be able to differentiate among knowledge. So it's a very loaded question. He asks, do you think the following statement is true or false? Buying a single company stock usually provides a safer return than a stock mutual fund. Okay? So here you go. As you can see here, this is actually a joint test of whether people understand jargon, so stock and stock mutual funds, and whether they know what's the relationship and what's the risk consideration between a single company stock and a stock mutual fund. We have worked with central bank, Department of the Treasury, in the US, the regulator, in some country, the pension commissioner, the institution, which have been in charge, actually, of financial literacy in as many as 13 countries, some of which belong to our European Investment Bank Institute team. And we were able to add those questions to national surveys in 13 countries. And this is actually via that we could discover 3 important findings, which are the one I'm going to describe later. We call this project Financial Literacy Around the World, or FLAT World for the acronym, but it is indeed what we found in the data, which is, to paraphrase Thomas Friedman, that the world is flat, that the findings are strikingly similar across countries. In other words, people across countries, even in countries with very developed financial market like the United States, have very little level of financial literacy. In the United States in particular, where I live and I know better, 30% of the population is able to answer correctly to all of the 3 questions. Even though these are individual, 78% of the US family own stocks, but they couldn't actually answer in particular the 3rd question, or couldn't do often very simple calculation. Of course, and as expected, the risk diversification is the most difficult questions to grasp. And I think this is actually important because risk per se is a very complex concept. We ask people, for example, to insure, to buy insurance contract. Many contracts have an insurance component or have an exposure to risk. But actually, risk is something that people know very little. After these 3 questions, of course, we have asked, I can tell you, a variety of 50 questions. But actually, our findings almost go back to the findings of those 3 questions. And all over the world, actually, we find that risk diversification is the most complex context that people do not know. And in fact, this is where most of the people do not even attempt to answer the question. They say simply, I do not know the answer to this one. What we found, and this is where the international comparison became incredibly important, is we found a strong gender difference in those answers. We actually saw it in the US, but we almost didn't see it. It took us an analysis of 13 countries to discover that in countries as different as Sweden, Italy, Russia, New Zealand, Canada, or Japan, women answer in the same way to the 3 financial literacy questions. They disproportionately say, I do not know. So who are the vulnerable group? Well, normally, the vulnerable group are also the group which are vulnerable in economic terms. So immigrants, the elderly, those with low income and low education attainment are the ones which display lower knowledge. And this is problematic itself because these are the ones for which actually managing money can be even more important. But there are 2 groups I'm going to focus on today, which are women and the young. In all countries, these are the groups that actually know the least. And we need to, I think, look a little closer at what the evidence say for some of those groups. And so this is where I'm going to direct some of my attention. Also note that most of the data set have data for 18 years and older. These are national surveys, so they don't cover the young. But actually up to 2 months ago, now we have also data for high school students and their financial literacy. And so I'm going to turn to those in a moment. Let me talk about women first. And I actually want to describe, just looking at 4 random countries, how women answer to the financial literacy questions. So this is just the US, the Netherlands, Germany, and Canada. I try to take away countries where you are from, so you don't have to look at those. But what you see here is the percentage of correct responses to the 3 questions between men and women. Okay? And as you can see, in all of these countries, women are less likely to answer correctly to those financial literacy questions. But it's not because they are more likely to be incorrect or wrong. It's that because disproportionately and in a very similar way, okay, you might not think that Canada and the US are different, but as Canadians, they really think they are different than the US. And certainly I would say the Dutch are different than the US, but not in the way women answer to the financial literacy question. They disproportionately say, I do not know. If you think about this, this is actually, in my view, a beautiful answer, right? You don't know, and you admit you don't know. I mean, how great is that? And that's why, you know, for us at the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center, women are an ideal target of financial education program. And I have to tell you that after this evidence, 2 things have changed. I've changed the way I teach my classes because I realized with this research that I wasn't motivating my female student. And second, we do a lot of financial education program for women. And actually, we do a lot of financial education program in general, but the people who show up are the women. I want to just zoom in the Netherlands and just show you how, for example, the proportion of do not know show, you know, the Netherlands is, you know, as you can imagine, you know, this is not like the south of Italy, right? This is a Nordic countries, you know, women are tall and tough. So, you know, but here as well, you see, you know, all of this proportion of I do not know answer. So the question is, what can we infer? Is it that women do not know or that women are not confident in their answer? Of course, both can affect behavior, right? This is actually what we set up to answer in, you know, in this new data. We were able to convince the Dutch Central Bank. We told, look, we have this great grant from the European Investment Bank. We can do a lot more study trying to understand financial literacy among women. So they actually were able to give us more fund to do more research. First of all, we wrote a paper, tried to explain, you know, why are there those differences? And one just said, or like one interesting finding, when we look at this data, in particular, we were looking at the Dutch data, the German data, and the US data, you know, you might think it's because, you know, like, this is really happening mostly among the older cohort. It's not true. It's actually present among the young women as well, so it's not a cohort effect. Interestingly, when we look in Germany, between East and West Germany, so we don't find gender difference in East Germany, and the reason is men as well know little in East Germany. So, you know, in fact, even 20 years after unification, there is a huge difference in financial literacy between what was considered East Germany versus West Germany. And I think this might actually tell us how we acquire knowledge, right? We acquire maybe among people with us or through our historical experiences. So East Germans, in a sense, or the one living in the area which was East Germany, have lower opportunity to learn. But in the West Germany, there is a very sharp gender difference between men and women. So as we move to a system with more developed financial market, women perhaps are left behind. So what we did in the new 2012 wave of the Dutch Central Bank survey, we have actually asked this question differently. So we have asked our 3 questions and taken away the do not know option. So we forced people to answer and figure out, are you wrong or not, right? And actually after that, we added the question, but how confident are you on your answer, okay? So let me actually go quickly through that exercise. We are still very much looking at this data, but since we got the data and since I was giving this result, I needed to show to the European Investment Bank that we are really doing all of the work. So we look at the MAVE wave. These are the questions as I have described to you earlier with the do not know option. In June, July, we take away the do not know option. We force you to answer, but then we ask how confident are you in that answer, okay? So we have a large sample of 1,500 respondents, and even we don't see a problem of attrition or learning between the two waves, and is a representative sample of the Dutch population. So here is what happens, and I don't know if this will work. So this is the simple interest rate questions that the Dutch actually tend to answer relatively well. And if I take, this is wave 1, so I have the do not know option, and as you can see, men and women have responded do not know, but women disproportionately more, as even in the 2% calculation, right? When we take that away, that option, as you can see, actually the proportion of correct answer goes up. The proportion of incorrect answer also goes up a little, but overall women can do the 2% calculation, right? Let me turn to the question about inflation, okay? As you take away the options, again, the incorrect answer increase, but again, women tend to respond correctly overall to also the inflation question. The risk diversification, how many people say do not know to the risk diversification? Here we go. Voila, as the French would say. 30% of men answer do not know, 54% of women answer do not know to these questions. But if you take away the option, actually almost double. We get for women, a much higher response rate, and actually they are mostly right, okay? They are more likely to be wrong, and that's really in a sense what I'm already trying to tell you. Women, in fact, have less knowledge. If they have to pick at random or if they have to force to be answered questions, perhaps they are not comfortable with, they are not always right, but they seem to know the answer, okay? So some of these do not know might actually be simply confidence. So let me actually show you next what happens in the, are people just choosing at random now? Right? Well, I took away the do not know option, but are they choosing at random? Are these correct responses just randomness? Right? Actually, the proportion is too high to be random, and I wanted to show you it's not random. For those, I'm doing the answer in wave 2 conditional of what you told me in wave 1. Okay? So if you were right in wave 1, if you were correct, and this is just a question of risk diversification, you are also correct in wave 2. Okay? And in the do not know, actually it's not 50-50. If you didn't know, men were mostly likely to be right, but also women were likely to be right in wave 2, but at a higher proportion than just 50%. So it's not that they pick, like just correct or incorrect at random. But let's turn to the most interesting part, which is confidence. Okay? How confident are people in this answer? Let me only consider the question about risk diversification, because that's the one where we have a lot of the do not know. First, let's actually turn to here. If you were correct in this question, how confident were women? Even when women were correct, okay, in the risk diversification question, they were not confident at all on their correct answer. In fact, as you can see, the confidence was measured on a scale from 1 to 7. Okay? So as you can see, women hardly pick 5, 6, or 7. It's mostly the men who actually pick 5, 6, or 7. So it could be that women are not as confident or men are overconfident, but I leave that to you to think about. So no, women, even when they were correct, they were not confident. Okay? By the way, here, when men were wrong, they were very confident on their answer. So here you go. You know, I always say that to some friends. But let's look at the do not know. Okay? Here, I have actually forced now these people to answer, right? So this is, women said do not know, right? And then I look at them later on, and I force them to give them an answer. As you can see, women were not confident, right? While men, again, even though they said do not know in wave 1, when they answer in wave 2, they tend to say, I'm pretty confident on my answer. What I'm trying to tell you is that what we have is evidence that, in fact, the knowledge of women is not as low as the responses to the financial literacy question seems to indicate, but knowledge as well plays an important, confidence as well plays an important role in how women think of their financial knowledge. So, like when we look, therefore, at here I'm just doing a simple regression to figure out whether this gender difference goes away if I just take away the do not know options, right? And it doesn't go away. Even if I control, by the way, you know, even if I control for a lot of economic characteristics, women, even when I take away the do not know option, still tend to respond less correctly to the financial literacy questions. Okay? So, you know, it wasn't just a matter of knowledge per se, or these do not know were not necessarily, you know, like I know but I'm not telling you, is I do not know and I do not know. What we have done in a lot of the studies we use, of course, we use the original questions where there is the do not know option, right? So in a sense, the do not know or this answer to the financial literacy question are now a combination of knowledge and confidence. So they measure both. And I think we would like to disentangle that a little bit more. So I'm going to show you how the estimates now are different in some of the regression that we normally run. So 3 years ago, we published a paper in the Journal of Financial Economics. It wasn't mentioned, but it's a good journal. We were very proud to publish in there, and the referees are awful. They ask you for like 5 revisions before you get to publish there. I will never publish in a finance journal again. So, like, there is a gender difference in financial literacy there is a gender difference in the participation in the stock market. You know, women are 13%, 14%, not accounting for any economic characteristic, less likely to invest in stocks in the Netherlands, okay? Now, if I account for a lot of characteristics, including their own education, including income, including whether they work or not, are still they less likely to hold stocks? Yes. Let me account now for financial literacy, okay? And does financial literacy explain whether or not women are more likely to buy stocks, given that I already account for their education? In other words, if you are a college degree person, you know, does financial literacy really help in explaining whether women buy stock? It does, okay? But actually, the estimates are different depending on which measure I use. In the July measure, where I take away the do not know, I think I measure a little bit more pure knowledge, right? So I leave the confidence out, and as a result, this is a little less kind of important, while the gender difference is still very high. And so, like, you know, the confidence is a little bit more captured by the gender difference. Instead, in the May measure, where women, in a sense, were able to say, I do not know, the financial literacy really is a measure of both things. It's a measure of knowledge and of confidence. So, of course, you would get different estimates, and how you interpret this result very much depends on whether you really want to disentangle just knowledge versus confidence. So simply to summarize, there is a gender gap in financial literacy, which I think really doesn't go away even if you account for confidence. So women, in a sense, know less, and I think it's important, therefore, even more that we do financial education program for women, because we can improve their level of financial knowledge. But when we look at behavior, we have to remember that for women, not just knowledge, but confidence can be quite important. And so if we want to empower them, we might want to think of both aspects when we do financial education program. Let me turn to a second group, which is very important, which is the young. And I want to show you why the young are a very vulnerable group. If I look at a data set like the US, where I can actually really cut across a lot of age group, as you can see here, the young are really the one knowing the least. Okay? In the US, if you are 18 to 24, you are relatively likely to be in college. And by the way, currently in the US, the student loan is the largest debt market. It's above $1 trillion, so it's much larger than credit card debt. So students who go to college today exit with an average of $30,000. So in other words, they start their economic life in debt. And they have to make that important decision whether or not to go to college and how to finance that education when they are in high school. And that's why it might be really important to look at them really early on. But if we look at their level of financial literacy, it's very, very low. Well, recently, we have information, actually thanks to the OECD, to 15 years old. So I don't know if you are familiar with PISA. It's called the Program for International Student Assessment. PISA started in 2000, and it was measuring basic skills. How PISA characterizes it is the skills that students need to be able to live in society. And in 2012, they have added financial literacy among the skills, the basic skills they measure when they look at 15 years old. I actually love the title of volume 6. It's called Student and Money, Financial Literacy Skills for the 21st Century. And actually, I think that's the best way to characterize financial literacy, is what you need if you want to live in the 21st century. In particular, if you are a young person who is going to start kind of the economic life in a system where you are so responsible for your economic well-being. And I've brought you a copy, which I'm going to leave here at the, I'm going to give to Conchita because Luisa was at the conference last week, so she already has her own copy. This has been a very large project. We started in 2010 to design those questions. I actually chaired the financial literacy expert group that designed all of these questions, and we actually put together experts that were able to help us to design questions that you can ask to 15 years old around the world. And here are the results. Of the 18 countries that participated to PISA, the one that scored the highest are Shanghai, China. The one that scored the lowest is Colombia. My own country is actually the one next to the last one. But the US, which is one of the countries with the most sophisticated financial market, scored in the middle. The countries that are here and circled in white are actually countries that have done above the OECD average. This is where the OECD average of the 13 countries among these 18 that participated score. And these are actually countries that have done several programs also targeted to the young. And so at least we can see some result at the aggregate level about how people are doing in those. Why do we care about this? There are actually a few interesting results in the PISA data per se. First, you can actually look not just across countries, and in fact, I think the evidence across country might be less important than the evidence within countries. You can distinguish among 5 levels of competence, and where the level 1 is really below the basic competence level. And in the OECD, more or less an average of 15 students actually score below that competence level. And very few, only 10%, are at the competence level 5, which is the highest competence level, where people are, in a sense, have really some more advanced knowledge. Let's look at the gender among at this level, at this age, at 15 years old. Interestingly, what we see that if you look at the top, boys seem to be no more than girls among 15 years old, okay? And this is particularly true in some countries. But interestingly, if you look at the bottom, that's also the reverse, that boys are more likely to be at the bottom than the girls. So I have to tell you that on average, in this data, we don't see gender differences, or the gender differences, apart from Italy, are not very high. So on average, we don't see those gender differences, and I have to tell you that one of the reasons why we don't see them is we have designed the questions so that women would have actually be less likely. I mean, we don't have a do not know options, first of all. We don't use technical terms or technical jargons, which is actually one of the reasons why the women tend to say, I do not know. And we ask them to respond in their own words, okay, which also tend to create less gender differences. When you do so, in fact, the data, at least at this level, doesn't seem to indicate gender differences. But of course, like the distribution is very wide and is much wider for the boys. So they are really, really good or really, really bad, okay? Actually, what I want to tell you is something that is even, I think, it is as equally important, which is if you look at what explains financial literacy among these young people. By the way, most of these countries, if you look at these 18 countries, I know I'm trying to go fast and I haven't left that picture there for a long time. Most of these countries do not have financial literacy in the schools, okay? So how do these young acquire knowledge? Who are those who are financially literate, okay? Well, those who are financially literate acquire it because of their socioeconomic background. So most of the knowledge happens because you come from high income or wealthy or high educated parents. And this is actually why there is, I think, this very important role or this important issue of inequality in financial literacy. We are going to ask people to make these very important decisions, but the young do not have that knowledge. And those who have it are disproportionately people from already privileged background. So I'm going to tell you, we are going to start unequal, and I think inequality in a society which has individual responsibility will only continue to grow. This is also true, by the way, for knowledge of mathematics and readings. Well, why should we care? And this is the answer to the third question. Does financial literacy matter? This is really hard to figure out, and we actually have worked for 2 years on a paper that tried to understand whether there is a link between financial literacy and wealth accumulation, and how strong and high that link is. This is terribly difficult because to be able to figure out, we had to sit down and actually understand how financial literacy affects wealth. So we had to sit down and really write down the whole economic model. And if you read the paper, you'll understand why my staff doesn't want you to bring it with me, because it's actually a paper with an an appendix, and it's a paper with probably 28 equations. But that was very important for us to be able to tell you how much financial literacy matters. And we are even able to address causality. How about that? So, as you know, inequality, wealth inequality has increased a lot. And if I just take a graph that shows how much of the top 10% own, this is of course in the US, we can see that we are going back to values which were there at the beginning of the 1900s. And this has been happening in other countries as well. What we have found, and it actually took us to work with a firm, a very, very large firm, and look at their administrative records, because we needed data on portfolio. So we needed actually people to tell us where they invest that money, which is actually not easy to get, to show that if you are financially literate, you are able to earn more on your portfolio. And in fact, how much more we estimated in the data is 130 basis points. Okay? I actually don't find this result unreasonable. People are more financially literate, are better able, and we see this in the data, to choose stocks, right? They are more likely to invest in stocks, and they are more likely to invest in stocks which have low fees, which are the index mutual fund stocks. Okay? So, you know, we see this also empirically, and if you look, in fact, at this very high quality data that we got after sweating for a very long time and be able to convince a very big, large, basically this is the central, the Federal Reserve Board, to give us the data about their employees. I'm going to try to finish quickly. We are actually be able to see that indeed people with higher literacy earn a higher interest rate. But here we go. If this is the case, now you can start seeing why, you know, there is a link between financial literacy and inequality. Take the same person, like the same income, the same education, and let this person have one invest at age 20 in the money market, and another same person invest the same money in the stock market. 30 years later, these people, which are very similar today, are going to look very different in their wealth accumulation, right? In other words, it's not just that how you invest, and it's not how you save that matters, and we know the rich save more, by the way, but it's how you invest your money. And in the life cycle, where there is a long period of time for the interest rate to accumulate, that you're going to grow really different. Okay? So in our model, we take a standard intertemporal model of savings. We have actually added many sources of risk. So we take a stochastic model. We add 4 sources of risk: labor earnings, longevity, interest rate risk, and health risk. Okay? So we make it as realistic as possible. We add borrowing constraint. But now you have another mechanism, which is you can invest in knowledge, and that knowledge brings a higher return on your investment. Okay? That's the mechanism that we put in our, in a sense, our model. This is actually very important to be precise, because once you have a model, then you can ask the question, how much wealth, how much of the wealth difference is due to financial literacy? And you can also do welfare analysis. If I start, and if I give everybody a higher endowment of financial literacy, does it increase the well-being? Does it increase your kind of utility later in life? Okay? So, no equation. Just wanted to tell you that our mechanism is the following. People are somewhat unequal in their income. Some are, for example, facing the high education and upward sloping age income profile, right? And so some of them will actually save a lot in the middle of life to have enough money to support their retirement, okay? Well, what is convenient for these people to do? Since they have wealth, in particular at the center of the life cycle, it will be advantageous for them to invest in knowledge. And so we have this endogenous financial literacy. And because of that investment, and depending on how much they invest, they actually earn a higher return. Okay? This is kind of how this system works. And if you think about this, it's probably not very different than what we see now. We see people being very different in their financial knowledge, and we see only a proportion of the population investing in stocks, while those who do tend to have a higher level of wealth close to retirement. But the question is how much, right? You might think this mechanism, it's important, but it explains only a small proportion of wealth inequality. In fact, that's the opposite. This graph wants to show you what contributes to this wealth close to retirement. Is it demographic? Is it your kids? Having children is expensive, in case you haven't found out. And so demographics actually account for some of the differences in the differences in wealth, but not very much. Even uncertainty, right? In this model, we have a precautionary saving motive, but that doesn't explain a lot of the difference in wealth, okay? In fact, the biggest contributor to the differences in wealth is financial literacy. Financial literacy can explain up to the 40% to difference in wealth. Why is that? It's exactly for this mechanism that if people are different, they're going to have different savings, but if they get a different return in this saving over a 30-year horizon, it really sums up, okay? So according to our simulation, in fact, from 30 to 40% of wealth inequality can be attributed to financial literacy. Let's go back to the 21st century. If people are going to be in charge, if the financial literacy is very different, okay, people will be very different. And if you look at the book of Piketty, who are the people who are really at the top? These are people with a high income and high education. These are also those with higher financial literacy. I know it's going to come here, so I wanted to give you some preview. We actually also show that there are a huge benefit from adding financial literacy in the schools. So if everybody starts with a higher endowment of financial literacy, they are all, in a sense, better off. So just because this was the topic of today's talk, of course, inequality is a feature we see in life. Wealth inequality has risen in a lot of countries, but we are at the cusp now of thinking how we can address it. And I can tell you that the new generation are going to face a very different world. And if we don't equip these people to live in today's society, which where their own financial well-being depends so much of them, I'm telling you, they start very unequal. And in particular, the women are going to be, even more, in a sense, knowledgeable, and inequality is only destined to grow, okay? If you leave the responsibility to individuals, what they do with their money will be very, very important. So I think it's really important that we include education, access to education, and in particular financial literacy, among the way in which we might want to think when we talk about inequality. I'm going to end now about telling you what we do about this. First of all, in case you don't know GFLAC, I wanted to tell you that we are based in Washington, D.C., but we have actually a connection, and when we mean a connection is we work and we have projects with 27 centers around the world. I like to show you this, my staff thinks it's a United type map, but it is a map because every node kind of indicates where we have a partner and when we have a research group. And so, of course, we have several in Italy and we have a lot in Europe, and when we are very proud of the work we do. We do have a very multidisciplinary approach, and for us to really understand financial literacy, economics is not enough. We have actually worked with sociologists, with psychologists, experimental economists, and now a linguist to actually shed light on financial literacy. And our newest project is actually, which we have launched last week at the OECD, is working with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are going to help us, first of all, to implement some of the work of the research, but are also going to help us do financial education program, for example, via apps, via workplace financial education, via program online for students, so that we can maximize kind of financial knowledge and the light we can shed on this important topic. And I want to end by thanking very much our funder. We wouldn't be here, and we would not have been able to do all of this research if it wasn't for the European Investment Bank Institute. So we are very grateful. I almost will forget that difficult interview. And also many, many thanks to all of the lecture series supporters who are here today. It was really great to see this great audience. We have a website, and we try to be very active in social media. So please follow us and see some of the initiative we are doing. At the moment, of course, we are working a lot with the PISA data, and we hope, and this has really been kind of the mission of the center, to try to collect a lot of data so we can better inform policy and financial education program. And of course, a very important topic is exactly inequality. Thank you.